it's Lizzie. I am 5 months pregnant right now. I'm so excited. My baby girl is due in May, and I'm doing something during my pregnancy that would shock my younger self, which is that I stayed on my bipolar meds throughout my entire pregnancy. I have stated in so many videos on this YouTube channel that I will stay on meds for the rest of my life, except when I'm pregnant, which is when I always said I would go off to prevent any birth defects to the baby. My husband and I planned to get pregnant in August, which is when we did conceive. And so in the months preceding that, I met with 3 different doctors, and based upon what they said, read more online, and we basically decided to stay on both of my bipolar medications, which are Lamictal and Seroquel. I heavily encourage everyone with bipolar disorder to stay on their medications in pregnancy, with the exception of 3 medications which should not be taken and should be replaced by something else. The 3 medications you really should avoid because they could cause severe birth defects are lithium, Depakote, and Tegretol. So if you are on those meds, you could just switch to another med before you get pregnant. This video is going to be the reasons I changed my mind on this and why I heavily encourage you to stay on meds. So number 1, I did all of my research on bipolar and pregnancy back when I was first diagnosed in like 2016, 2017. I was super into doing bipolar research back then. Now it is the end of 2023, so new information has come out and I was dealing with some outdated information. The next thing is I was misinterpreting research. So on the FDA website, they have a ranking of medications during pregnancy and they give it a grade level ranking. So A would be a really safe medicine with 0 risks. D-rated would mean like there could be a serious birth defect. The majority of bipolar medications have a C rating on the FDA website, with the exception of the medications I listed that cause severe birth defects, which have D rating. So when I'm seeing a C rating, I'm thinking there's a risk of a slight birth defect. Like, it's not a severe birth defect, that would be like a D rating. C just did not sound good to me at all. I wanted like an A medication. But the doctors I talked to told me that the C ranking on the FDA website does not mean 100% it will cause this birth defect. Instead, it means there isn't that much information to give a definitive like thumbs up A rating. This goes along with something I learned a long time ago, which is that there are not any scientific studies on bipolar medications in pregnancy. So hearing this sounds terrifying, right? To me, it sounded like my baby is going to be a guinea pig and we don't have any information on how these medications affect pregnancy. And I'm the type of person who does not take risks. I do everything very safe when it comes to health. So I was like, I am not going to risk my baby having a birth defect because there are no studies on it. To me, having 0 studies was just terrible. So I was also misinterpreting the lack of a study. So the reason they haven't done a study, it's because the scientific community considers it unethical to do an intentional study with a psychiatric med that could cause a birth defect. So instead, what we have is gigantic pregnancy registries. There are bipolar registries run by researchers, which thousands of women have contributed to. So I'm actually in a pregnancy registry right now for my medications, and basically what you do is you talk to them in your first trimester, in your 3rd trimester, and then you report a few months after giving birth if there were any birth defects to your baby. So they have tens of thousands of women with bipolar who have gone through pregnancy with different medications, and they have the percentage risk of different things happening to the baby. For me, it was like the end of the world that there are no studies done on the medications, but the fact that we have these pregnancy registries with thousands of women submitting data on how their babies were affected by the medication, to me, that made me feel really safe staying on. To just be open, one of the possibilities that can happen with Lamictal, it is rare, but cleft palate is one of the things that can happen to the baby. So this is something that can be surgically fixed after the baby is born. It is not a permanent birth defect at all. It can be completely fixed through surgery. So something really important to know if you've never been pregnant is that all of the development happens in the first trimester. So all of the organs and everything is formed in the first trimester. So if there is a birth defect that happens from a medication, it will be in the first trimester. So when I heard this, I was like, okay, I will go off my meds for the first trimester and then go back on. My mindset was that even though there's a very small risk of cleft palate for the baby, I'm not going to take that risk. And I saw it as like, I know being off meds will be terrible. I'll be in severe depression. It'll be one of the worst times of my life, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice to protect my baby. So that was kind of my mindset. I told the doctors, like, what if I go off of all of my meds, but then if it's really bad and I get really suicidal, I'll go back on if it gets bad. So what I was told is that if I go into a depression episode or a manic episode, it is not just me who's suffering, it's the baby who is suffering. Being in a depression or manic episode is an extreme stress response in your body. You will have higher cortisol levels, which will be affecting the baby. Another thing my doctor said is that going on a new medication during pregnancy is bad for the baby. Going off of medication during pregnancy, bad for a baby. Increasing the dose, bad for the baby. It's really good to just stay on the same medication throughout pregnancy. You should try to avoid going on and off medications and changing them. So a lot of people say that an unborn baby can feel their mom's emotions. And so people will even say, like, try to not get too stressed during pregnancy, like it's bad for the baby. This comes from actual research. If the mom is going through something that's extremely stressful or traumatic, it will have physical and emotional effects on the baby after the baby is born. And I'm going to give you a list of those, but first I want to talk about what can cause that. Being in a depression episode is one of them. If there's domestic violence going on, if the baby's dad is like physically abusing her or emotionally abusing her. Also, if there's something going on, like you're in a war zone, or if there's some kind of natural disaster. Also, extreme anxiety. So if someone has like generalized anxiety disorder, being in those kind of stressful environments can cause all of this to happen once the baby is born. It can cause respiratory and digestive problems, irritability, or sleep problems in the first 3 years of life. So for 3 years of that kid's life, they can have problems digesting food, problems breathing, not sleep as much, being more irritable. So it could cause a baby to be colicky, to cry and cry and cry and not be able to be comforted. Other things are developmental problems, cognitively, also having emotional problems, and more likely to have mental illness symptoms going into adolescence and their teen years. So while the breathing problems, digestive problems, sleep problems only last for 3 years, there can be emotional and cognitive effects on your baby that can last through their childhood into their teenage years. So it can have permanent effects on your child if you're in like an extremely stressful environment. And that can include a depression episode. And I believe it can include a manic episode. Studies specifically talk about depression episodes. So I could not find anything on manic episodes. I think the reason is because depression is more common because a lot of women without bipolar also get depression, whereas mania is like less people, right? So my guess is that mania would affect the baby in the same way. There just are not currently studies on it. But the way that depression and mania send like a stress response through the body, to me, it makes sense that mania would cause the same things. I think mania might be worse than depression on a developing baby if you're just not sleeping at all. So I initially had the attitude of, I'm willing to be in a depression episode for the entire pregnancy and suffer so much in order to protect the baby from any possible birth defect. That was my attitude going into the pregnancy before I got pregnant. And when I told this to my doctors, they said it's not only about you, it's about the baby. You being in a depression episode will hurt the baby you being in a manic episode will hurt the baby. And so I realized it's not just like, oh, I can power through it and suffer through it for the good of my baby. No, that will hurt my baby being in that episode. So then I was like, okay, but what if I try the first trimester to be off meds and then only go on the med if I go into an episode? My doctor said that it's bad going onto a med during pregnancy. So if you go on a med, go off a med, increase the dosage of a med, those things are not good for the baby. So it's better to be on your meds from the beginning to stay on them throughout the whole pregnancy. So don't be mad at yourself if you have to increase a medication you're on during pregnancy because you have symptoms from your bipolar. Like, don't beat yourself up about that, but try to be on the same meds for the whole pregnancy. And increasing the dose of a med you're already on is way less harmful than being on no med at all and then going up to a full dosage. And the thing about going on bipolar meds is you don't just go up to the high dosage, you're increasing the dosage over like a month. Like Lamictal, I think, takes 6 weeks to get to the max dose. So every week you're increasing the dosage more, and it's not good for the baby to be experiencing those things. So next, I want to talk about something that my doctors did not tell me, but that I experienced in pregnancy, which is that normal pregnancy symptoms, common pregnancy symptoms, will trigger bipolar episodes. One of the pregnancy symptoms I have had so much starting at the beginning of first trimester is insomnia. It is so hard to fall asleep. I will be like laying in bed, try to go to bed at like midnight, take my meds at midnight, 400 milligrams of Seroquel, and then it'll be like 5 a.m. and I am not able to fall asleep, even with Seroquel. Sometimes I have to take an extra Seroquel pill, and it takes hours to fall asleep. I have such strong insomnia from the pregnancy hormones. Just imagine if I was off of my meds completely. What is the #1 trigger for mania? Sleep deprivation. And this is extremely common in pregnancy. Another thing is I had a lot of visual hallucinations in my first trimester. I have never had a visual hallucination in my entire life. My first time having a visual hallucination was from my pregnancy hormones in my first trimester. And I'm on 2 bipolar medications. I am on 400 milligrams of an antipsychotic. It should be preventing all hallucinations. And yet for the first time, the pregnancy hormones are triggering that. And I'm just thinking, like, what if I was off all of my meds? Like, would the hallucinations be even stronger? Would I have gone into like full psychosis? It's really scary thinking about what would happen. Another terrible pregnancy symptom I had in my first trimester was extreme exhaustion. It was very similar to being in a severe depression episode. It did feel different. So I could tell it wasn't depression. I don't even know how to explain how I could tell, but it did feel different. But it was extremely similar in that I had no energy. It was so hard to get out of bed. I showered like only once or twice a week. I wore the same clothes for 2 or 3 days straight, sleeping in them as well. I mostly work from home, so I worked in bed. I ate in bed. When I was eating, in between bites, I would lay back down because sitting up took too much energy. So I had like this like debilitating exhaustion in the first trimester, so similar to a severe depression episode. And Lamictal is what always blocks me from going into a depression episode. And I just cannot imagine having that amount of debilitating fatigue and then being off my meds and also being in a depression episode. I honestly don't think I could have done any of my jobs. I think I would have had to quit all of my jobs. I did quit YouTube and Instagram, TikTok. I stopped that completely in my first trimester because I couldn't do it. I was so low energy. I remember thinking so many times in my first trimester, I wish I was unconscious. I wish I was never awake and I could just sleep through the whole pregnancy so I wouldn't have to be awake. And there were just times where I just cried because I was so sick and in so much pain and I didn't know how much longer I could take it. And I can just imagine all of that sickness and sadness being mixed with depression. And I could see myself attempting to end my life because I'm already having this thinking, I wish I was unconscious. which is so similar to how I felt in severe depression. And I just could imagine mixing that with depression could just be so horrific, and I don't think it would be safe. Another thing to consider is postpartum. So it's really common for bipolar women that directly after giving birth, you spike into a manic episode that can include psychosis. The reason for this is because of the hormones that are released right after giving birth. There's so much dopamine and oxytocin, and that can trigger a manic episode. It's extremely common. It happens to so many bipolar women. If you are completely off of medication during your pregnancy and then you give birth, you have this huge spike of dopamine, you go into a manic episode, psychosis, hallucinations, you could get sent to a psych ward. If you're completely off all of your medications and you're going through this huge hormonal spike, it's totally something that could happen if you're completely off meds. And in the US, they don't have that many psychiatric units in hospitals that are mother-baby units. So it's very likely that you could be separated from your baby right after giving birth if you are completely off meds. And luckily, antipsychotic medications kick in within like under a week. So you would probably be able to get up to a high dosage of an antipsychotic within like 3 or 4 days and be okay. But think about those 3 or 4 days. Like, are you willing to risk being separated from your baby for the first 3 days of your baby's life? Like, that is so traumatic for the baby. When the baby is growing inside you, the baby memorizes your scent, your heartbeat, the baby knows your voice. Like right now, my baby is listening to me talk. She can hear me talking because my voice vibrates through my body. And so right when my baby's born, she smells me, she hears my voice, she knows who I am, and she feels so comforted being with me. Risk getting sent to a psych ward because the pregnancy hormones spike me into psychosis. It's just, to me, not worth the risk. And it's not even about like me being sad about being separated from my baby, it's the trauma my baby will face. For 9 months, she's been within me, memorizing my smell and my heartbeat and my voice, and then being separated from me is so traumatic and scary and terrible for my baby. And so just the fact that it's a common thing where many bipolar women spike into mania right after giving birth, it's just the safest thing to do is to be on your antipsychotic your whole pregnancy, and you're already up to your max dose when you give birth. And another thing is that postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety are also really common, not just postpartum mania. And so bipolar women are at a risk of postpartum depression after giving birth. And I know for me, Seroquel does not help my depression. Lamictal helps my depression. That drug takes 6 to 8 weeks to kick in. So if I started that drug up right after giving birth, I have like 6 to 8 weeks where I could be in postpartum depression without relief. And luckily there are other antipsychotics that can kick in and help with depression, but you've got to consider breastfeeding. So one of the medications that does actually help me with depression and anxiety, I have gotten anxiety before with my bipolar, and olanzapine has been very, very helpful in getting rid of depression and anxiety in under a week. The problem is that olanzapine, while it can be safe for breastfeeding, olanzapine can decrease your milk supply and make it so you cannot breastfeed anymore, whereas Lamictal does not destroy your milk supply. Because you're limited on what antipsychotics you can take that are safe for breastfeeding, you have less options of medications that kick in immediately because mood stabilizers take longer to kick in. So if you're planning on breastfeeding, you're already limited on drugs that are gonna kick in under a week. So that's why I think it's better stay on the whole pregnancy. That is everything I wanted to share in this video. I will definitely be making more videos on bipolar and pregnancy, especially after the baby's born. Luckily, my husband and I both work at colleges, so our baby's born right after finals week. So we have the whole summer where the two of us are still gonna work a little bit, but we'll be able to be home all the time together. So I know that will make postpartum way better. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!